Hello friends, welcome back to the next session on material requirement planning with respect to operations planning, scheduling and control. Now let's begin with our learning. In this particular session, we'll be able to understand and deal with the concepts of capacity engagement planning. The learning objectives. At the end of this particular session, the learners will be able to understand what do we mean by capacity engagement planning, what is the importance of capacity engagement planning in the organization, and what are the various activities that have been undertaken in the departments to see that how the capacity engagement planning can be implemented. Now, let's first understand what do we mean by capacity engagement planning. The capacity engagement planning is a certain concept wherein when a series of activities is being undertaken at all the departments in a respective stores or manufacturing or a production or a sales or a finance, every component is the participants of the organization. May it be the labor, maybe it be a person of a blue collar job, maybe of a person of a shop floor, or maybe a salesperson, a representative, a finance assistant, and so on. So based on the inputs that is been provided in the organization, the output is been decided. So when the input is been provided and there are certain activities that have been undertaken for the conversion process and the resultant that is being seen is an output, when all those activities are being done in a very well coordinated way and a designed manufacturing system is into existence, then such engagement is called as a capacity engagement planning. Capacity engagement planning should be done only after the forecast and long-term planning has been considered. So, based on the availability of labor, based on the availability of people in the organization, what are their various skill sets, the knowledge and abilities that they possess, on all those particular factors, the capacity engagement planning needs to be undertaken. And hence, it is very essentially important to see that there is an effective capacity engagement planning into existence. The ability to attain, store, or generate is defined as a certain amount of capacity. Take an example of an individual. A person may be good in accounts and hence he is fitted or he is comfortable with finance department. A person is good to speak and he can interact with the people. So he is good to speak, or we say that he is good to speak, then he can perform well or better in the sales department. A person is good a decision maker, then he can be at the strategic level department. A person is a good planner or a good operator, then he can be working at the shop floor or in the production department. And hence, based on the capacity, based on the skill sets of an individual, the task or the job role is been assigned to him. And hence, for these particular concern, the capacity of an individual needs to be identified. And based on the ability or capacity of an individual, he can attain or he can store and he can generate results or output to the organization. And hence, for an organization, capacity refers to a system's ability, that is, a person's ability to deliver the output within a specified time frame. So, a particular person who is conducting or completing an activity within a specified time frame can be called as a capacity-oriented person. And hence, the planning of such activities of an individual is essentially required. Management capacity is defined as an operations or the quantity of input resources available to create the proportionate output. And hence, an individual's capacity to create a certain amount of output within the specified time frame with the necessary inputs that have been given for him is called the concept of capacity engagement planning. Now let's understand the definition of capacity engagement planning. So, capacity is often defined as the greatest production capacity that may be achieved within a typical working schedule. So, when the schedule of working is been planned and certain individual or the employees or the persons have been deployed for those particular concern, the series of activities or completion of time, that is an output with the necessary inputs in a specified time frame, is called the capacity. And hence, capacity planning is very critical in nature because we need to evaluate and identify all the factors that have been related to an individual and whether they are able to complete those particular tasks in the specified time frame or not. And hence, the decision making plays a very key important role in understanding and identifying whether those activities will be completed in a specified time frame or not. And hence, when if any of the operational activity is being undertaken, those activities needs to be completed. The activities may be related to the production line, may be related to the inventory, may be related to the sales, may be related to a certain product, or maybe related to launching of a new goods into the market. And hence, the capacity of an individual needs to be identified at a very effective stage, and based on that, certain decisions with respect to how goods and services can be employed and deployed, all those decisions needs to be undertaken. And hence, there plays an important role with respect to the capacity engagement planning. Now let's understand what is the correlation between the capacity engagement planning and the strategic planning. The strategic capacity is a person's strategy for identifying and measuring the overall production capacity. So, based on the capacity of an individual, based on his capacity to work on a particular machine or a particular floor or on a particular task, one can be designed or one can be assigned a certain task about which activity he can complete or he can perform. So, strategic capacity engagement planning is always a strategic oriented, which takes into account the individual skill, knowledge, and ability to perform a certain type of job. The various capital intensive techniques or resources with respect to the plant, the machinery, the manpower, the strategic planning, and the furnitures, fixtures that have been employed, and the long-term investment that a company is doing, for all those particular concerns, strategic planning is essentially required. The strategic planning is directly related to the capacity planning because it also deals with the capacity of a machinery. So may it be a tangible asset or maybe an intangible asset, the identification of the potential, skill, knowledge, and ability of an individual or of a certain machinery needs to be assessed or identified at a primary stage, and based on those particular concerns, the further engagement planning needs to be undertaken. The strategic planning is termed as a very critical planning because it involves the decision which may either go in a very beneficial or a fruitful way, or sometimes the decision may go wrong or hasty, which may create a loss to the organization. So, in this particular case, the requirements of future needs to be identified, needs to be assessed at the prior stage, and based on the future requirements, the planning of activities in the future or in the current stage needs to be undertaken. If it has been found that the plan that has been prepared is not feasible or it cannot be implemented, then such type of planning needs to be revised. And hence, capacity engagement planning goes hand in hand with strategic capacity planning, which has been planned at the top level management, and the capacity engagement planning prepared at the middle level management. What does it guarantee? The strategic capacity planning guarantees the company that remains competitive and its long-term growth objectives are met. So, in order to meet the long-term objectives of a particular firm, we have to see that, or a manager who is designing the strategic planning always has to see that all those objectives are being met in a specified time period, and accordingly the activities are being completed within the specified time frame. And hence, for these particular concerns, strategic planning is essentially required. Now let's understand the classification of capacity planning. The capacity engagement planning has been divided into three categories. Number one, the short-term planning. Number two, the medium-term planning. And number three, for the long-term planning. In terms of the short-term plan, the plan which has been associated or undertaken for a very few or a short period of time. Maybe it a period of either a week or for a particular cycle, that is a particular day, or for the long-term perspectives of a particular month. So for those particular concern, the planning that has been undertaken is called as short-term planning. The planning that has been undertaken for a specified cycle or for several amount of quantity of goods and services may be called as a medium-term planning. Medium-term planning is associated for a duration from 1 month to the maximum of either 6 months or 12 months. The capacity engagement planning that has been undertaken for a long-term period, that is, which may be more than 1 year, for a period of 3 years or for 5 years, which is implemented on the tangible goods, that is the long-term assets of the organization. Such type of planning is called as the long-term planning. The planning associated with the middle level management and the top level management may be classified under the category of long-term planning. The planning that has been implemented with the lower level management or at the shop floor may be considered with the concept of short-term planning. And in this way, the capacity planning is divided into three categories. That is either a short-term plan or either a medium-term plan or a long-term plan. Now let's look at the goals of capacity engagement planning. The ultimate aim or the goal of the capacity engagement planning is to fulfill the current and future demand with the least amount of waste that has been possible. So, whatever skill, knowledge, ability does the individual possess, based on his skill, knowledge, and ability, the essential or necessary task or a job should be assigned to an individual, and it should be seen that those particular tasks will be definitely completed in the specified time period. And for this particular concern, utilization of capacity is essentially required. Another major consideration in terms of capacity planning is the lead time and the lag in the strategy planning. There may be at times certain ups and downs in the planning, and the planning may go wrong. And hence, at this particular stage, every organization or the planner of the capacity engagement must have a plan B which can be implemented very effectively, and accordingly, the loss of the organization can be saved at the early stage. So there are three types or forms of capacity planning that can be undertaken. Number one, the lead capacity planning, the lag strategy planning, and number three, the match strategy planning. So based on the requirement, based on the need, or based on the goals of the organization, any one of the capacity planning strategy needs to be implemented, and it has to be seen that the production activity is being undertaken very effectively. Now let's understand what are the various factors that affect the capacity planning. Number one, the first factor that affect the capacity engagement planning is the production facility or the plant layout itself. The production facility with respect to the layout of a certain plant, that is the flow of material from one location to another location, the design of the plant layout that has been undertaken, that is which department is located at which center and how there is a connectivity between or inter-exchange between the departments, and the location factors. Location factors also plays an important role, and hence the capacity planning engagement gets affected. Number two is the product line or matrix or the production technology. So whatever technology that has been implemented, how is the flow of the production line and what is the matrix that has been followed? That is either in a horizontal basis or on the vertical basis. This particular strategy identifies about in what way or mode the production or the raw material is been moving from one machine to another machine, one cycle to another cycle, or in the assembly line. The human capital. With respect to the human capital, it directly gets affected or impacted with the help of capacity planning that is into existence. That is, individual's job is always different from one and another. So every job design, a job requirement, or job role that has been provided, it differs from person to person. The remuneration of a person also differs, and accordingly, based on the capacity that has been engaged, the human capital also differs, and hence the capacity planning gets affected with those particular concerns. The operational structure. The structure of the organization or the production department with respect to the scheduling, the quality assurance, the process of JIT, Kanban, and certain Kaizen techniques that have been implemented with those particular concerns, the cost of the organization may either increase or may either decrease. And hence, the production or the operational structure also plays an important role with an impacting factor in terms of capacity planning. And lastly, the external structure. The external structure with respect to the plant layout of the organization from the exterior perspective, that is the outsiders, the competitors, the suppliers, the dealers, the wholesalers, it also gets impacted with respect to the capacity planning that can be undertaken. Now, all these particular activities plays a major role or a significant role in terms of the safety regulation. So, overall plant layout or the plant manufacturing unit which is affected within the organization or outside the organization, it directly affects your capacity planning that can be undertaken. Now let's understand the concept of aggregate planning. Aggregate planning is a concept of establishing, assessing, and maintaining a preliminary estimated timetable of an organization. So we need to prepare a certain timetable which clearly mentions about which activity will be undertaken at what level, at what point, and at what stage. And hence, assessing or preparing a plan of all those activities is considered under the concept of aggregate planning. The targeted sales estimates always needs to be identified at an early stage. So whatever may be the sales or what projections of the sales have been undertaken, whether those targets will be met or not, what should be the inventory level according to the need of the requirement, and accordingly what production activity will be completed in the specified time period. For all those particular concerns, the aggregate planning or the capacity engagement planning is essentially required. And hence, the overall strategic plan with respect to the production department, the capacity department, the strategic department should be there into existence. And lastly, the timetable that is so designed, it should be always to see that it has been meeting its objectives. So The time frame that has been decided for meeting a certain target should also be achieved in the specified time period, and accordingly, the activity needs to be completed. And hence, we can come or summarize that the process of creating an aggregate plan begins with the determining and ascertaining the current capacity. So, based on the current capacity of the organization, one has to come to a certain conclusion about what plan can be prepared, how it can be accomplished, and what are the various factors that have been essentially required to complete that plan. Capacity is total number of units that can be employed either in terms of human beings or in terms of resources that can be employed to complete the manufacturing process or the manufacturing cycle. So since the computation of the total value is being undertaken, the production time needs to be reduced. It needs to be seen that the machine is not remaining idle and all the components of the factors of the production are being essentially utilized. The total number of units required is indicated as a demand. So when there is a demand for a certain product into the market, simultaneously it should be seen that the accomplishment of the demand as a certain perspective needs to be completed, and accordingly the sales targeted should be met by the organization. And hence, as an aggregate planner, the various planning techniques with respect to either the short-term level, medium-term level, or the long-term planning, it should be implemented, and all the approaches should be used. And hence, one has to see that the proper tactics with respect to the implementation of plan at the strategic level, at the production level, and at the capacity engagement planning level needs to be implemented in a very effective way, and it is getting a long-term benefit to the organization. Now let's summarize what we have learned in this particular session. In this particular session, we have studied the concept of capacity engagement planning. We have also seen how capacity planning or engagement planning can be undertaken or implemented in the organization, and also what are the various activities that have been undertaken with respect to the capacity engagement planning. Lastly, we have also seen how do capacity engagement planning and the aggregate planning are being correlated with each other. I hope you must have enjoyed the learning at this particular session. Thank you so much for your patience listening. Thank you.